Remember when flying felt simple, even exciting? You'd arrive at the airport expecting a smooth journey, not a test of patience. The plane wasn't just transport. It was part of the trip. Now the experience depends heavily on who you're flying with. Some U.S. airlines still deliver calm, predictable flights where problems are handled quickly. Others turn small disruptions into long delays, missed connections, and unnecessary stress. Today, we're ranking 15 major U.S. airlines, from the ones travelers should approach with caution to the few that consistently get things right, not obscure carriers. The big names most Americans know well, and sitting at number 15 is an airline so familiar, so heavily booked, that many passengers don't realize how often things quietly go wrong. Before we start, think about this. What's the worst airline experience you've ever had in America? And who were you flying with? Keep watching. There's a good chance it shows up on today's list. And now, let's begin with number 15, an airline that didn't collapse overnight, but slipped year after year until it quietly landed at the very bottom. Once seen as a pillar of U.S. aviation, now a case study in how steady decline can catch up with even the biggest brands. Do you know the name already? Number 15, American Airlines. Let me ask you something. How can an airline this large, this established, turn a routine trip into something this stressful? American Airlines is everywhere. For many travelers, it's the default choice. The airline with the biggest network, the most flights, and decades of experience. On paper, that should translate into predictability. In practice, it often doesn't. The problem isn't a single delay or one bad flight. It's how often small issues spiral. Tight schedules leave little room to recover. Busy hubs amplify every disruption. And when something goes wrong, passengers are frequently left waiting, not just for the flight, but for information. One frequent flyer described it like this: "With American, I don't worry about the flight, I worry about everything around it." That line reflects what many travelers experience again and again. You're not shocked by chaos. You're worn down by friction. Late arrivals that trigger missed connections, rebooking that takes longer than expected, updates that arrive late or not at all. The trip continues, but with more stress than it needed to have. What makes this stand out is scale. American is large enough that problems rarely feel personal, yet complex enough that fixing them takes time. Smaller airlines can adjust quickly. Budget carriers lower expectations. American sits in between, and that gap shows when plans start to unravel. For passengers, the lesson is simple. Flying American often means planning defensively, leaving extra time, avoiding tight connections, expecting the journey to take more effort than it should. Because the frustration here isn't about one bad day, it's about how familiar this experience has become. And how about you? Did your trip with American Airlines feel manageable, frustrating, or somewhere in between? Share your experience in the comments. Your story might help someone else avoid a stressful trip. And now, let's move on to number 14. An airline where the ticket price looks almost too good to be true. The cabin feels stripped down to the essentials, and one small disruption can turn into a very long day. Guess which one comes next? Number 14. Spirit Airlines. At first glance, everything looks like a bargain. The price is low, the route is direct, and the booking screen makes it feel like you've beaten the system. For many travelers, that's exactly how trips with Spirit begin. The airline is built entirely around one idea: stripping the ticket down to its absolute minimum. Dense seating, tight schedules, and almost no built-in flexibility are part of the design. When everything runs exactly as planned, the experience can feel surprisingly efficient. You board, you fly, you land. No extras, no illusions. The problem appears the moment that plan breaks. Because margins are so thin, even small disruptions are hard to absorb. A delayed aircraft doesn't always have a quick replacement. Missed connections can mean waiting far longer than expected. Rebooking options are limited, and when multiple flights are affected at once, the system feels stretched quickly. Then there are the add-ons. Carry-on bags, seat assignments, and basic conveniences steadily raise the final cost. Many passengers don't fully notice this until late in the process, when changing plans is no longer simple. What looked cheap at the start begins to feel far less forgiving. Spirit isn't trying to offer comfort or flexibility. It's designed for travelers who prioritize price above everything else and are willing to accept uncertainty if something goes wrong. In that context, the airline often does exactly what it promises, but this model leaves very little room for error. When timing matters, when connections are involved, or when plans can't shift easily, the experience changes quickly. What starts as a straightforward trip can turn into a long day built around waiting, adjustments, and compromises. And that's where Spirit draws a clear line between saving money and absorbing risk. If this list has surprised you so far, consider liking the video and subscribing. It really helps us keep making breakdowns like this. And now, let's move on to number 13, an airline that doesn't just cut costs, but reshapes entire routes around efficiency. Fewer flights, thinner networks, and far less room to recover when something slips. You might not notice it at booking, but you will if plans start to change. Number 13. Frontier Airlines. One frequent traveler once summed up Frontier like this: "Flying Frontier is like planning a road trip where there's exactly one road and no detours." It's funny, but it's also surprisingly accurate. Frontier isn't built for flexibility. It's built for efficiency, and only efficiency. At first glance, Frontier looks like a straightforward low-cost airline. Cheap fares, simple cabins, newer aircraft. But the real story isn't on board. It's in the route map. Frontier often operates with very few daily flights on each route, sometimes just one. That keeps costs low, but it also removes any margin for recovery. When everything runs on time, the system works. You board, you fly, you land. But if a flight is delayed or canceled, options disappear fast. There may not be another aircraft nearby. There may not be another crew. Rebooking often means waiting until the next day, especially on smaller or less popular routes. This is what separates Frontier from airlines like Spirit. With Spirit, frustration usually comes from fees and add-ons. With Frontier, it comes from isolation. Miss that one flight, and you suddenly realize how thin the network really is. For passengers, the experience can feel calm right up until plans change. There's no dramatic chaos, just a quiet moment where you understand there's no backup. Frontier can work well for simple, point-to-point trips where timing isn't critical. But when connections matter or flexibility is important, the limits of this model become very clear and very hard to work around. Number 12. Allegiant Air. Some airlines are designed for everyday travel. Allegiant is designed almost entirely around vacations. Its entire model revolves around leisure trips, long weekends, fixed return dates, and destinations people associate with time off. Allegiant doesn't try to serve business travelers or constantly changing schedules. It assumes your trip has a clear start, a clear end, and very little need to adjust in between. That assumption shapes everything. Routes connect smaller cities directly to vacation destinations, often skipping major hubs. Flights usually operate only on certain days of the week, aligned with typical travel windows. From a cost standpoint, the model is efficient, planes stay full, routes stay focused, and when everything runs as planned, the experience can feel simple and direct. The challenge appears when travel stops behaving like a vacation. Because the schedule is built around fixed leisure patterns, there are few alternatives when something goes wrong. A cancellation doesn't just mean a delay. It can mean waiting days for the next flight. And when hotels, rental cars, and time off work are already locked in, the impact is immediate. This is what separates Allegiant from other low-cost airlines. The limitation isn't accidental. It's built into the design. The airline works best when nothing needs to change. On board, the same logic applies. The base fare covers the seat. Everything else is optional and clearly separated. For travelers who plan carefully, that predictability can be useful. Allegiant fits trips that stay neatly inside a vacation window. Fixed dates, modest expectations, and no need for adjustments. Once travel turns into logistics instead of leisure, the airline's vacation-first design becomes very noticeable. Not because it fails, but because it was never built to adapt. Now let's move on to number 11. It's the airline where the name on your ticket often hides the words "operated by," and the aircraft, crew, and rules may belong to a completely different company. Passengers usually realize it only at the gate. Do you know which one it is? Number 11. SkyWest Airlines. For many passengers, the problem starts with a simple misunderstanding. They think they're flying with a major airline, until they realize they're not. SkyWest operates hundreds of flights every day on behalf of larger carriers. The ticket carries a familiar brand. The gate announcements sound official, but the aircraft, the crew, and the actual operation belong to a regional partner most passengers never chose consciously. That distinction matters more than people expect. When everything runs smoothly, regional flights fade into the background. Short hops, quick boarding, routine arrivals. But when delays or cancellations happen, the experience changes fast. Passengers often find themselves stuck between two systems. The airline on the ticket controls rebooking and policies. The airline operating the flight controls the plane and crew. Neither side fully owns the problem. The result is frustration that feels uniquely draining. Questions bounce between desks. Information arrives late or inconsistently, and simple issues, like missed connections or overnight delays, take longer to resolve than they should. This isn't about pilot skill or cabin crews. SkyWest's crews are generally professional and experienced. The issue is structural. Regional routes already operate with tight margins, smaller aircraft, and limited spare capacity. Add outsourced responsibility on top, and recovery becomes slow and fragmented. What makes this especially painful is the lack of transparency. Many passengers don't realize they're flying with a regional partner until they're already at the gate or already delayed. By then, expectations collide with reality. On paper, it looks like a major airline flight. In practice, it often feels like being passed between companies, each pointing somewhere else. Number 10. Sun Country Airlines. It starts off feeling surprisingly normal. The cabin looks fine, the crew is professional, and nothing immediately signals trouble. For a moment, it feels like you're flying with a smaller version of a major airline. Then the experience begins to shift. Sun Country lives in an awkward middle ground. It isn't a full-service carrier, but it also isn't a true ultra-low-cost airline. Instead, it blends pieces of both, and that identity crisis shows up in how the airline operates. On some routes, Sun Country behaves like a leisure airline. Limited frequencies, seasonal schedules, and heavy dependence on demand spikes. On others, it feels closer to a traditional carrier, selling itself as a reliable option with reasonable comfort. The problem is that passengers don't always know which version they're getting. When flights run smoothly, the experience can be perfectly fine. But when disruptions occur, the hybrid model starts to strain. Backup options are limited. Rebooking can take longer than expected. And because the airline operates a relatively small network, problems don't always have easy solutions. The onboard experience reflects the same inconsistency. Some elements feel streamlined and modern. Others feel pared back, with extra charges and limited flexibility. It's not confusing enough to be shocking, just inconsistent enough to be frustrating. What makes this stand out is expectation management. Sun Country often looks like it should behave one way, then responds another. Passengers arrive with assumptions that don't always match how the airline actually functions. That gap isn't dramatic. It doesn't ruin every trip, but over time it creates a pattern where travelers aren't quite sure what standard to expect or how much margin they really have if plans start to shift. And that uncertainty is what defines the experience more than any single delay or fee. And now we move on to number 9. This is one of the smallest airlines on the list, flying short routes with a very limited fleet, where a single technical issue can ground half the operation. Number 9. Silver Airways. Flying with Silver Airways feels very different from flying with almost any other airline on this list. There's no sense of scale here, no wide network, no hidden backup, no feeling that the system can quietly absorb problems. Silver operates a very small fleet on short regional routes, mainly around Florida and nearby destinations. When everything runs smoothly, the experience is simple and uneventful. Flights are short, airports are smaller, and expectations are usually modest. The issue is how fragile the operation is. With so few aircraft and crews, even minor disruptions have an outsized impact. A single mechanical issue can delay or cancel multiple flights. When that happens, options disappear quickly. There often isn't another plane to swap in, and rebooking choices can be extremely limited. This isn't about chaos or mismanagement. It's about exposure. Silver doesn't have the depth to hide problems or recover quietly. Passengers feel every disruption immediately, especially when schedules are tight. The onboard experience reflects the same reality. Cabins are basic, aircraft are small, and comfort is secondary to simply completing the route. That can be acceptable until plans start to unravel. Silver can work when timing is flexible and expectations are low. But for travelers who need reliability or backup options, the airline's small scale turns from simplicity into risk very quickly. And the next airline on our list is known for avoiding big hubs, favoring smaller airports, and marketing itself as a simpler, calmer alternative to crowded terminals. Bright branding, direct routes, and a very lean operation. Do you know which one it is? Number 8. Avelo Airlines. For many travelers, the biggest stress in flying starts long before boarding. Crowded terminals, long security lines, and the feeling that everything takes more effort than it should. This airline tries to remove that part of the experience entirely. Instead of major hubs, it focuses on smaller, secondary airports, places where getting to the gate feels closer to arriving early than arriving exhausted. The result is a calmer start to the trip, fewer crowds, shorter lines, and less noise before you even step on the plane. The route network is intentionally simple. Most flights are direct, with no attempt to funnel passengers through complex connection systems. When everything runs smoothly, the experience feels refreshingly light. Boarding is quick, airports are quiet, and travel feels closer to transportation than endurance. The limitation shows up in what's behind the scenes. With a small fleet and a lean schedule, there isn't much buffer when things go wrong. A delayed aircraft doesn't always have a replacement nearby. A cancellation can mean waiting longer than expected for the next option, especially outside core routes. The system works best when nothing unexpected interrupts it. On board, expectations are kept realistic. Cabins are basic but clean. Service is straightforward. And pricing is clear. There's no promise of luxury, just an attempt to make flying feel less complicated than it usually does. This airline fits travelers who value simplicity over flexibility. If your trip is direct, your timing isn't fragile, and avoiding big airports matters more than having endless alternatives, it can be a genuinely pleasant way to fly. But the experience still depends heavily on smooth operations, because there isn't much room yet for recovery when plans shift. Number 7. Breeze Airways. The idea sounds almost too good to be true. Non-stop flights between overlooked cities, modern aircraft, and an experience designed to feel simpler and more human than traditional airlines. That vision is what sets Breeze apart. Instead of focusing on major hubs, the airline connects overlooked city pairs directly. For many travelers, that's a real advantage. Fewer connections, shorter travel days, and routes that actually make sense if you don't live near a major airport. When everything runs smoothly, the experience feels efficient and refreshingly logical. The issue is consistency. Breeze is still evolving, and that shows in its network. Routes change, schedules shift, and long-term predictability isn't always there. A flight that works well today might not exist a few months later. For travelers who plan far ahead, that uncertainty can be frustrating. Operationally, the airline runs lean. That allows flexibility and rapid growth. but it also limits recovery when disruptions happen. Delays or cancellations don't always come with many alternatives, especially on less frequent routes. On board, things generally go well. Cabins feel modern, service is friendly, and pricing is clearer than on many low-cost carriers. There's real potential here, but for now, Breeze still feels like an airline in progress, promising, thoughtful, and improving, yet not quite consistent enough to fully trust when plans really matter. Now let's move on to number 6. This is the airline built for island-to-island flying, where short hops over the Pacific feel effortless, but that same model doesn't always translate as cleanly once you leave its home turf. Number 6. Hawaiian Airlines. Some airlines feel perfectly matched to the place they serve. This one is built around islands, short distances, and a rhythm that makes sense in the middle of the Pacific. Within Hawaii, the experience is usually smooth. Island-to-island flights are frequent, operations feel familiar, and crews know the environment well. For local travel, the airline often feels like a natural part of daily life rather than a complicated transport system. That strength doesn't always carry over beyond its home base. On longer mainland routes, the experience becomes more mixed. The airline offers a comfortable, relaxed onboard atmosphere, but operational depth is more limited than with larger mainland carriers. When schedules slip, recovery can take longer, especially outside Hawaii, where the network is thinner. This isn't about constant problems, it's about scope. Hawaiian operates well in the environment it knows best, but once flights stretch farther and connections matter more, the airline doesn't always feel as resilient as bigger competitors. The onboard product is generally pleasant. Seats are comfortable enough, service is calm, and the overall tone feels less rushed than on many domestic flights. For leisure travelers heading to or from Hawaii, that can be a real plus. Where caution helps is planning. Tight connections, rigid schedules, or complex itineraries can expose the limits of a more region-focused operation. For direct routes and relaxed timelines, the experience often holds up well, and this is where the list starts to turn. From this point on, we're talking about airlines that many travelers genuinely choose, not just tolerate. At number 5 is a carrier famous for extra legroom, free snack, and a very recognizable blue and white brand that built its reputation on comfort. You probably already know which one comes next. Number 5. JetBlue Airways. For many travelers, this is the airline that made flying feel humane again. More legroom than most economy cabins, free snacks, and an onboard atmosphere that feels noticeably calmer than average. From the passenger's seat, the experience often starts on a high note. When everything runs smoothly, it delivers on that promise. The cabin is comfortable, the mood is relaxed, and the airline's personality feels intentional rather than corporate. On short domestic routes especially, the comfort gap compared to other carriers is easy to notice. That's why many travelers actively choose JetBlue instead of defaulting to bigger airlines. The challenge appears behind the scenes. JetBlue doesn't have the same operational depth as the largest U.S. carriers. Its network is more concentrated, which makes it more vulnerable to congestion and weather disruptions. When delays pile up, recovery can be slower than expected, and rebooking options may feel limited. This contrast defines the experience. The airline feels premium while you're seated, and less resilient once plans begin to change. Expectations are higher because the product is better, and when operations don't keep pace, frustration shows up faster. For travelers who value space, onboard comfort, and a more relaxed feel, and who can tolerate the occasional operational hiccup, JetBlue is often a genuinely good choice. Not flawless, but thoughtfully better than most of what came before it on this list. Number 4. SkyWest Airlines. Few U.S. airlines are as instantly recognizable as this one. Open seating, no change fees, and free checked bags. For years, that simple formula felt refreshingly different in an industry full of add-ons. That philosophy still defines the experience. SkyWest is built around efficiency and frequency. A point-to-point network, quick turnarounds, and lots of daily flights make it easy to recover when things go slightly off schedule. When the system is running normally, it works very well. Flights are frequent, rules are simple, and disruptions are often easier to manage than on more rigid networks. The appeal is predictability. Passengers generally know what to expect: straightforward policies, fewer surprise fees, and a tone that feels less corporate than most large carriers. For short and mid-range domestic trips, that consistency matters. The weakness appears when the system is under real stress. Because operations are tightly connected, larger disruptions can spread quickly. Weather or staffing issues don't always stay local, and recovery can take longer than passengers expect from an airline known for simplicity. On board, the experience is comfortable but basic. Open seating works well for some travelers and poorly for others. There's flexibility, but not much luxury. Even so, Southwest remains a strong option. It does what it promises most of the time, and for travelers who value transparency, frequent flights, and fewer hidden costs, that reliability keeps it firmly near the top. And the next airline is defined by massive hubs, long international routes, and a globe logo you've seen in airports all over the world, especially in Chicago and Denver. Number 3. United Airlines. For a long time, this airline carried a mixed reputation, a massive network, global reach, and years of uneven execution that made many travelers cautious. That picture has been changing. United operates one of the largest route networks in the world, with major hubs connecting North America to almost every region globally. That scale brings clear advantages. When flights are delayed or canceled, there are usually more rebooking options than on smaller carriers. International connectivity is strong, and complex itineraries are easier to manage within one system. What's most noticeable today is how differently the airline handles disruption. Over the past few years, United has invested heavily in operations. Fleet updates, scheduling discipline, and ground coordination have improved. Delays still happen. That's unavoidable at this scale, but recovery feels more controlled and more predictable than it once did. The onboard experience is solid and professional. Cabins are functional, service is consistent, and long-haul flights feel designed for endurance rather than flair. United doesn't lean on personality or branding. It leans on coverage. That approach works especially well for frequent flyers and international travelers. When weather disrupts schedules or connections tighten, the depth of the network becomes visible very quickly. There's usually a next option, sometimes several. Consistency still varies by hub and route, and not every experience feels identical. But compared to where the airline stood years ago, the difference is noticeable. Today, flying United feels less like managing risk and more like navigating a very large, very capable system. Number 2. Alaska Airlines. There's a calm to this airline that's hard to fake. From boarding to landing, the experience often feels measured, deliberate, and quietly well run, without trying to impress you at every step. That consistency is what stands out most. Operations tend to be disciplined. Flights leave when they're supposed to, crews communicate clearly, and disruptions are handled with a level of organization that feels practiced rather than improvised. When things go off schedule, the response usually feels controlled, not rushed. A big part of that comes from focus. The airline knows where it performs best and builds around those strengths. On its core routes, especially along the West Coast and into Alaska, everything feels tightly coordinated. Schedules make sense, turnarounds are efficient, recovery from delays is often quicker than expected. The onboard experience reflects the same mindset. Cabins are comfortable without being flashy. Service is friendly but not performative. Amenities are thoughtful, not excessive. It's the kind of experience that doesn't draw attention to itself until you realize how little friction there was. As the network has expanded, some variability has crept in. Certain routes feel more stretched than others, and not every airport experience is identical. But even then, the airline tends to handle pressure with restraint rather than chaos. What many travelers appreciate is how predictable the experience feels. Not because nothing ever goes wrong, but because when it does, the response feels steady and transparent. Flying with Alaska often leaves you with a simple impression afterward. Not excitement, not frustration, just the sense that things were handled properly, and that's a quality most airlines never quite manage to deliver consistently. And now, we're down to the very top. The final airline is instantly recognizable by its red and blue branding, its fortress hub in Atlanta, and a reputation for handling disruptions better than anyone else in the U.S. Ready to see the winner? Number 1. Delta Airlines. This airline doesn't rely on personality or clever marketing. It relies on systems. Delta's advantage shows up before most passengers even notice it. Aircraft are positioned earlier. Crews are scheduled with more margin. Gates, maintenance, and ground operations are coordinated with fewer last-minute fixes. The result isn't flashy. It's stable. When disruptions hit, that stability matters. Weather delays, air traffic congestion, or missed connections don't disappear, but they're handled differently. Rebooking happens faster. Connections are protected more consistently. Recovery feels deliberate rather than reactive. Instead of improvising, the operation adjusts. That approach carries into the cabin. Aircraft interiors are consistent across much of the fleet. Service is professional, and procedures feel standardized rather than experimental. Nothing is designed to surprise you. Everything is designed to reduce friction. What separates this airline from the rest isn't that problems never happen. They do. It's that small issues are less likely to cascade. A delay stays a delay. It doesn't automatically turn into a missed connection, an overnight stay, or hours of uncertainty. Even on busy travel days, there's a sense that the system knows what comes next. Flights don't feel fragile. Crews don't feel rushed. The experience feels managed. Flying with Delta rarely leaves a strong emotional impression, and that's exactly the point. You arrive, collect your bag, and move on, without having to think much about how you got there. In today's air travel environment, that kind of quiet reliability is rare and unmistakable when you experience it. And that wraps up our ranking. Now I want to hear from you. Which airline surprised you the most with its place on the list, and which ranking felt completely deserved? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this breakdown helped you think differently about how you choose airlines, consider liking the video and subscribing for more clear, data-driven travel guides. Wherever you're flying next, plan carefully and travel safe.